All right, good morning on Saturday, December 23rd, getting ready for Christmas Eve and the Christmas holiday and trying to get this thing posted as soon as humanly possible so that you guys in MC 201 in this winter session can go ahead and get the quiz out of the way in case you're traveling or doing stuff Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. And happy holidays to everyone, whatever your holiday is. If you're having a Festivus celebration, invite me because, I would enjoy gathering around the pole for the airing of grievances. You're not going to see me today. I stayed up late till about 3 in the morning trying to fix the online chapter and decided I'm going to have to take some more time and do that and just go ahead and do the lecture and the quiz first and get that out of the way and post it up on Blackboard, provided for you guys so you can get the quiz going. And you can read the chapter later after I've written it. Some of the stuff I had included in terms of the history of film in article form from other folks. I didn't feel comfortable just chunking in there, so I'm having to do more original research, more critical theoretical research. But blah blah blah. All you really care about is this lecture. So let's get going. Today we're doing film and bricolage, making something from something. We're going to dig a little deeper into the concept of bricolage and talk very directly and clearly about how that relates to film, kind of where the film industry is at now, and do a little bit of history of film. But we're going to do it backwards. We're going to put the history back later on in the film. There we go. I was wondering why it wasn't going to start up for me. This room in the background of the introduction is called a salon de bricolage. And what it's meant to be is a creative space where people can take from a lot of available objects and make something new or make something interesting. There's a do-it-yourself element of it if you're talking about design and architecture or in carpentry, but the term is definitely very broad-based, and we're digging a little deeper into it because I just want to highlight it as a key concept for you to learn when you're working in multimedia environments or in the converged media platforms. This is probably the direction of your education if we can get our act together and continue to improve the curriculum as a department. And it's definitely in many ways the future of the professional work, being able to take from a lot of different sources, media sources, not arts and crafts and stuff necessarily. However, for the artists out there, your work in actual physical bricolage, actually making art pieces and applying design will have its own role in mass media production as people look for more bespoke, if you will, or more oh God, I almost said the word artisanal. As people look for more I guess unique creative works to incorporate into their mass media efforts. Right. So let's look at a little bit more about bricolage. This is a still from the promotional materials for the film Hugo, where this kid, obviously it's a movie about movies, but this child finds this automaton and takes an interest in it and trying to fix it. It was something his father had been working on in the film, and it's the crux of the whole thing. But it definitely calls to mind bricolage and taking from a lot of pieces and putting together something new. I think this movie might have, in the background, inspired me to combine these two concepts some time ago because it basically draws this connection between taking from what's around you and what's available in terms of storytelling tools and in terms of ideas and other elements of film and art and architecture and putting it all together in hopefully in a new and interesting story fashion. All right, so bricolage is more than just do it yourself. It's more than just sitting with a blank piece of paper and doing cutouts and trying to make new art out of a lot of available pieces of macaroni and ribbon and glue and glitter and whatever the heck that they had us use in grade school. yeah, the term is related to collage. It is related to taking from a lot of different pieces and making a new work, and references what's close at hand. But the actual French word means something closer to tinkering. And so I want this image to tie everything together because, yeah, there's a definite element of tinkering going on in the film Hugo. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend it because it kind of explains this whole concept of tinkering your way to new successes in film. There are innovations in the technology of film all the time, but I would argue, on the other hand, um, when it comes to storytelling, we're getting into an environment where films are becoming relatively derivative. What's available for filmmakers, yes, is the latest and greatest tools. So when they go to design new stories and to tell you know blockbuster level stories that they're hoping to make $500 million on in a release, yes, they're pulling from all kinds of amazing available filmmaking technologies, from obviously special effects and graphics and shooting in 3D, obviously shooting in incredibly high definition quality. Um, so on the one hand, as tinkerers, they have the coolest tools to play with. Whole houses developed just to making background effects. Um, you can't. It feels like you can't make a blockbuster film now that doesn't have some massive special effects elements. Um, but story-wise, a lot of the films that we're seeing come out now are classic narratives dressed up. You see comic book stories that are relatively equal that are approximately equal to Greek myths. You see romantic comedies that borrow from Shakespeare heavily, the romantic poets, romantic novelists, and war movies obviously have their antecedents in Herodotus' histories, biblical texts, oral traditions, and mythologies. And there's nothing wrong with making reference to works that have come before. It's when major motion picture houses and distribution companies rely almost solely on existing brands that have already been built in other platforms because they're not as willing to take risks, that we see something of a problem. And the problem that I'm identifying is the marketplace of ideas. It gets a little limited when everybody is trying to make a blockbuster. You have motion picture companies and distributors who have to spend millions and millions of dollars to promote a film, and so if they know going into it that that they must that ticket prices are relatively high, and that it's an arms race in terms of technology. The story itself is the one area where they don't want to take a lot of risks. They'll take risks in terms of how they promote a film. They'll spend a ton of money in promoting a film. If it costs tens of millions of dollars just to get people in to see the movie, with the hopes that they enjoy it and that they have a big, first weekend box office that then helps the movie stay alive and stay on top for the next 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks or something like that. It's understandable that they don't want to take risks on the story, but what's lost then is this ability for other storytellers to enter the marketplace and to compete. It's just that we don't seem to have a great mechanism for mid-sized movies in this current economic climate. So when I say marketplace of ideas, what I mean is this is not a very good marketplace. It's as though you only have 2 or 3 major brands to choose from, and they're sort of comic book movies or derivative comedies or dramas that make sense without making a lot of specific cultural or literary references, or even having very creative dialogue in many cases, because wordplay is often frowned upon, because these films need to make sense for a global market. So you have comic book movies, which are relatively easy to translate or to dub into Chinese or into other languages. And again, there's nothing wrong with presenting our culture, sharing it across other societies. But if you have to make a global film and it has to be a blockbuster, or that's the game that we're playing now, what is missing is these other films that that film companies would take a chance on. There are plenty of productions that are low budget that you never see in theaters, that never get sort of the the full promotional run, and that you wouldn't really see it unless you were really trying to go find them in theaters. But I guess one possible alternative is for small-time filmmakers to make films for the home theater market, because home theaters are getting better if you want the movie experience. But if you're talking about possible effects on society and information reaching people, there's a lot of safe filmmaking going on. And right about now, there there are people who have liberal politics and conservative politics, and you might say, what does this mean? And I would say, I don't know. Like, what politics do you think mass market films have? Do you think that they're particularly conservative? Not always. And so I'm not up here from this Marxist critical perspective saying, oh, gee, these movies are all really pro-capitalism and pro family values or something. That's not necessarily always the case. So I'm saying marketplace of ideas needs to be better varied, just so that people see representations of their own cultural aspects on film, not just the Hollywood version of things. So it really speaks hopefully to all audiences that this marketplace is relatively limited, because Hollywood has its own view of things. And I'm not taking issue with that on a personal level, but when it comes to getting new ways of thinking and fresh blood and what I'm going to call a genetic variation of ideas out there so that culture can evolve based on a lot of options, not just seeing the same old comic book brands, we're not doing so good. Another concern that I see, and I'm going to have trouble finding a citation that demonstrates this. It's more of a potential problem than one that's been documented for decades or something in the industry, is that you have a filmmaker maker class, and then you have an investor class, and the only people making money are the investor class. This arises in other industries. Tech is a decent example where, unless you're Mark Zuckerberg or Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, you're not going to become a billionaire from coming up with a great idea. You're going to make a product. You're going to put a lot of the risk in yourself. You're going to take your life into your hands and into your credit cards and try to build something. And at the end of the day, your best hope is to sell it to a larger corporate entity or to an investor. The idea that makers might through meritocracy create something that is incredibly powerful or valuable, particularly in media spaces, and then ride that to success. It is possible, but the major sort of billion-dollar success a lot of times comes from people who just sit back and already have the money and can take a few gambles. And so what I'm recognizing is, but what I'm not able to sort of fully articulate based on academic literature, I think because it's relatively new theory, is that big media productions are sharing something in common with big technology productions, and that is, investors stand to make the most gain because they can promote other people's ideas, not necessarily because they're coming up with ideas themselves. So this is a blockbuster model. I've hinted at it a few times, but it has to do with globalization in filmmaking. You're making films for a global audience, and when you make films for a global audience, they tend to come from well-established brands that filmmakers know already have a built-in audience, and they tend to be films that are relatively easily translated or easily dubbed, and so they're not particularly literary in their background, and there's not a lot of risk-taking in terms of characters or representing people outside of sort of the status quo power structure, and you might say these films are all really different and very creative, and yeah, they're great. They're great movies. They're big blockbusters, but generally speaking, they're about white people, or in Shrek's case, green people who talk like Scottish people, doing basically doing battle or falling in love, right? There's nothing wrong with the blockbuster movie. I'm not saying it's bad to have movies about white people. I'm not saying that, obviously, whatever. But the idea that the top movies that are seen globally, that are major representations of our culture worldwide, tend to be about white males and their battles and their concerns, and it's somewhat limiting. I think if you saw a greater variety of filmmaking, you might still see 6 or 7 or 8 out of 10 films, 10 of the top films being, about the same sort of, type of person. But there's definitely more room for diversity in major blockbusters. And like I said, a lot of the reason for that is it's a high stake gamble to produce a film, and film companies are not trying to make 25 films and hope for some type of great influence in the marketplace of ideas. They're hoping to make a lot of money, and they're not gonna put a $25 million marketing budget behind some idea that somebody thinks people might like because it's new and different. But the problem is, obviously, a lot of the best things in society and culture come from people taking risks and doing stuff that nobody thought would work. We don't see a lot of that in blockbuster filmmaking now. We see a lot of sequels and a lot of things based on previously successful books, previously successful films, previously successful books. I guess Titanic was not made from a previous media property, but it was a story that people were relatively familiar with. But when I look at the ones that are relatively new in nature, Independence Day, Titanic, and Jurassic Park, out of some of the, these are some of the top films for each of the different movie corporations. These are older films. These are 20-year-old films now. All right, now, just because I like to do things backwards, we're going to talk about history of film really briefly. And I forgot to put an underline in this one. All right, well, if something were underlined, it would be the Lumiere brothers. You know what I'm saying? All right, so cinematograph, people sitting down to watch films in a house, right? Lumiere brothers in France were credited really as being the first to do that. History of film starts with toys that had moving pictures. Those would spin around in circles, though. I've only ever seen those in museums. You can play with them. You basically look through a hole, and then these little pictures, it's like an animation that kind of moves around as the thing spins. Then there were personal viewing motion picture machines. You'd have to kind of walk up to it like these little big binocular-looking things you stick your face up into. And then the Lumiere brothers were the first to cast movies in front of audiences and really project them broadly for people to really feel and experience. And that's a whole new level of the medium, and that's where I think modern filmmaking and staring at the silver screen, where all those references really come from. And the time frame in the context of this course is penny press comes out in the 1830s and 1850s and establishes the first mass medium. 100 years later, we have the establishment really of the modern film industry between the 1930s and 1950s. Those are really rough years, right? It's a rough kind of time period. But what you see then is the establishment of kind of the biggest mass medium, the one with the greatest stakes. And a final note, bonus question is going to be about porgs. Yeah, I have seen The Last Jedi twice. I love blockbuster films. I just think there's more room for other types of films out there too. More room for more diversity in storytelling style and in the people that films are about. And I would like to see, this is just a personal thing, I would like to see more diversity in films actually get released in theaters. But then again, I'd have to pay $30 for me and my wife to go see them in a big movie theater. And so, what we probably also need are places like the Wildey. Edwardsville is really spoiled to have a place where people can go see different types of movies A lot of them are, older classic films for cheap, but where people can see, sort of, $8, $9, $10 movies instead of 17.50, and you get the 3D glasses, and then you spend another $100 on snacks. Oh my God! All right, the note for the test: porgs or puffins. This is from an article on Kotaku. The Last Jedi created porgs, according to recent reports, because the island that they were shooting on actually had these puffins, and they couldn't get rid of them, couldn't get them out of the shots, so they just incorporated them into the filmmaking, which I thought was funny. So definitely want to know about Lumiere Brothers. Definitely want to know about porgs as puffins, and I'll get that quiz posted right away. Thank you guys, and Merry Christmas, and have a Happy New Year, Happy Holidays in general. We'll catch you again. On Tuesday when we get a little bit back to normal. The actual text chapter will come up sometime this weekend. I'm just taking my time in making it better and revising it. All right, see you later.